Okay, so let's start. The topic of today's talk is Angular architecture, converging concepts and practices. So we'll be talking about different concepts that are involved when you're deciding for Angular architecture and also some practices that will help you go forward without having much hassle. So a bit of introduction. I took interviews of you like small information. So my name is Mohammed Ahsan. I'm a Google developers expert in Angular, which means Google itself acknowledges my expertise in the Google built technology Angular. There are only 91 GDEs in Angular in the world. Two are here in Pakistan. I'm one of them, and the other one is Mashood. I'm also a software architect at Modus Create. So I usually build web applications using Angular as well as hybrid mobile applications using Ionic. So that's currently the stack I'm currently working on. I also work on backend using Node.js. I've worked with a lot of databases, MongoDB, PostgreSQL, Redis in the past, but my expertise lie in Angular since the first day of my job was to explore Angular. So it's kind of a whole experience throughout my career. I'm also part of Angular Pakistan, so I organize different events, including this one, with different amazing folks throughout the company. I'm also part of Devin Code. How many of you know about Devin Code? Okay, only a few. So Devin Code is a community which helps other communities. So for instance, if you are interested in a particular technology, let's say TensorFlow, and you want to create a community named TensorFlow Karachi or TensorFlow Pakistan, Devin Code is a community that will help you grow. For instance, they can provide you venue, they can provide you speakers, they can provide you opportunities to speak in different community events as well. So if you want to kind of be in sync in what's happening in Karachi or Pakistan because they are growing, you can definitely follow Devin Code on Facebook and Twitter, and you can see different information about the events happening. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to Twitter. This is the Twitter handle that I have. If you want to know about Angular and what's going in the Angular world, do follow me because I retweet what's happening in Angular world daily. And I keep myself up to date with what's happening with Angular because that's part of being a GDE. You have to be updated, you have to spread the knowledge, and you have to kind of make an impact. So you can follow me on Twitter. You can see my work on GitHub. I'm kind of an active contributor to different repositories. In the past, I have contributed to Angular CLI. I've also contributed to Ionic. And I've also created different libraries on Angular. I think one of the libraries is Device Detector, which has, I think, above 600,000 downloads so far. So yeah, and if you want to be in touch, ask questions, you can ask that on LinkedIn. I'm actively present there and I reply very often. So you can ask any questions on LinkedIn. And there's a channel on YouTube. Whenever I get time, I post some videos there based on JavaScript. They are not very basic, but they are kind of intermediate level with topics like how closures work, how you can work with async await and stuff like that. So you can see different videos there as well. And I'm going to share the slides on the page of Angular Pakistan, so you can refer to this later on as well. So what will we talk about today? These are the key concepts that we'll go through today, which will help you understand more about Angular architecture and the choices that you can make to build better applications. So we'll be talking about architectural considerations, that what are the things that you have to consider when creating Angular apps, how you should structure different modules in Angular. And since this session assumes that you already know about modules, I'm not going to go in the depth of it, but I'll still show you while the demo. How you can organize components in different folders, what structure you should follow. So we'll talk about that as well. How you can reuse components throughout your applications, that's one of the topics. And how you can organize different features and what do you have to think when creating different features. So the question is why? Why do we need to understand all of this while we can just import different scripts in the HTML, simple JavaScript, and when we talk about different components and different frameworks, it's different. So why? There are a couple of things. There is something called planning prevents poor performance. And that's because you can create different things, but if you have not planned that well in the later run it will hurt you for sure, because I have been through that and I have a lot of experience with Angular projects. I think I have done more than 25 projects in my career, big projects. So I really know that planning is really important. So consider you have to create a huge architecture. Let's say you're talking about an enterprise application that you have to create. What happens when you don't plan? Any guesses? This. At some point, you either would have to refactor your code, or you would have to create a new application and port all your components there, or something else. So you have to make sure that planning is always there. So there are some architectural considerations that you have to aware. First of all, whenever you're creating the application, you should think, what is the app all about? What does it do? So that's the overall app overview in terms of what the app is supposed to do. Is it an app like OLX, or is it an app like Facebook, Twitter? What is the main idea behind that? That will give you an idea of the decomposition of the overall structure. The second thing is logging. Logging is very important, and I've seen that in 60% of the projects that we don't do logging. And when I say we, I mean senior developers, right? So logging is very important, because when you let's say you've got an email from your client and he says that the app is not working. Now you don't have any idea what that means. So you will ask, give me more details and stuff like that. And sometimes the clients are pissed, because you should be aware of what's happening with the app yourself. That's what they are paying you for. Because it's a fact that you can have clients of different sorts. Some clients are really soft. Some clients are, just pain in your head. So logging makes it easier for you to understand what's happening within the app when something goes wrong. So you can have different logging mechanisms. You can save logs on your server. You can integrate with different third-party APIs which support emails when something goes wrong. I believe Sentry was one of the applications that I use in one of the projects. So whenever something goes wrong in the app, Sentry basically catches that error and kind of captures all of the stack trace, and then it emails you with the overall information. So you know before anyone else that why the application broke. State management is one of the hot topics in Angular. Can anyone tell me what do you use for state management so far in your Angular applications? Yes. NGRX. Any other choices? Okay. Redux. Redux and NGRX are basically the same thing. Apart from that, how do you maintain your state in your application? Do you keep all the data in your components? Do you keep it in local storage? What do you do? So that's the question. So there are a lot of things. You can use NGRX, you can use Mobex, which is, there's also a package for Angular. And you can also use observables for state management as well, like to keep things in sync when something changes within the app. So that's also one thing that you have to analyze before you are jumping into the code. What are the app features? How will you divide them? How many pages will there be in the app? Will there be some features shareable between different pages, or will there be separate modules? So that's the question that you have to ask yourself when watching the SOW or the document. You will have to see how the server communication is being made, what kind of security that involves, how are the, let's say if you have private keys, how are they provided into the app? Do you provide it within the code? Not a good idea, because if anyone gets the code, they can connect with the server. Are you providing that with environment variables, one of the possibilities, or any other mechanism that you may want to? So these are the things that you have to analyze when creating the app. Also the shared functionality, as I said, and there comes a point when you have to decide, what does shared functionality mean? Are we talking about sharing components or directives within the app, or are we talking about creating something which we will be using in different apps? For instance, enterprises like Google, they have their own design systems, their own component libraries, and they create a library which we can call a shared functionality, and they can use it differently in different situations, in different applications. So within one organization, there can be many applications which can share your functionality, and that will help you create the components in such a way that it doesn't take time later on when you have to move things around. So these are some considerations that you should think about. There are also some considerations based on your team, what kind of team you have, what kind of organization you're working with, and what kind of client do you have. So either you should go for unit testing or not. How many of you have done unit testing so far? One, two, three, four. Okay, right. How many of you plan to work for any company outside Pakistan? One, two, three, four. Okay. So big companies enforce that the developers should do unit testing, and that's because of several reasons. Because without unit tests, there would come a time when the app will start hurting you. So unit testing is one of the crucial things while developing Angular applications, and Angular is basically called a test-driven development framework. So you have to follow the testing if you want to kind of avoid the hassles later on. Should you do E2E testing? Sometimes you do want to do these things, but the client stops you by saying you have to ship this in a week or something, so you cannot do that. So based on that, you can make decisions right away. And this is the point that we are discussing is before you start jumping into the code. So you can analyze what kind of timeline the overall project has. Does it have to be shipped into 4 weeks and it's a lot of functionality? Then you cannot do unit testing or E2E tests. But if you can, you should, because it will kind of make things stronger for you. It will make your app more robust, and when you are about to ship it for production, the client will have more trust on you. That is the main thing. And this is something that many developers miss because of just like to get through with the project, but that hurts the reliability of the developer itself. So make sure that the more you can test your projects, the more better you will be as a developer, and the project will be for you. Should you consider CI and CD? What is CI? Continuous integration. And why is it used? Shipping the code. Okay. Anyone else? Raise your hand and tell me. No problem. I didn't know it like 2 years ago as well. So CI is basically integration, as you said, but it kind of tackles a lot of things. For instance, I'm doing unit testing and E2E testing, and I have 5 developers in my team. So whenever someone pushes a code, how do we test things? Will the developer himself or herself will test everything on every commit? Because then for even a single patch, we might be running like 5 or 6 minutes of tests every commit, which is not optimal. So CI helps in these kind of things, that whenever you push something to your repository, it starts running the unit test itself. And you can also put different things here and there as well. Like usually the projects I work with, we run unit tests, end-to-end tests, as well as the production build to make sure that our production code is solid. And you can even kind of manage different things, like if you have a main branch master, you can put configuration that it should only build on master branch and not on the other branch to save time and things like that. And CD is continuous delivery, which means that after everything would have been tested, if every step was successful, then you can eventually deploy this to the production. So CI/CD is one of the things I would recommend for your projects, and you can start by exploring something called Travis CI if you have been using GitHub. So GitHub has an application integrated called Travis CI, which you can use for your GitHub projects. So let's say you create a to-do app. You can write unit tests on it, E2E tests on it, and then you can include it with Travis CI. So whenever you push, it will run the continuous integration tests automatically. Okay. Should you consider CDN server for static assets? Any idea why do we use that? At any example of an application using CDN? Yes.
Few years ago when I started as an Angular developer, there comes an ad engine, Adobe ad engine. So what happens is the website is about the medical research, and the ads were kind of similar to the medical research going on, but the data is so much of ad that you cannot publish it on the website because the load on the page would be so big. I mean, you can say the size of a page would be MBs, which is not appropriate for a single page application.
Okay.
So what happened is that they hosted their ads and their content text content comes from one server, which is very important to a person, and then sometime the ads and the other media stuff also coming along from other servers, so
Okay.
that the person who is reading article is not distracted, does not feel that the website is not working or something
Okay.
else, and it also feels like a full-fledged website as well. Then, so the purpose for CDN is that to serve data which is not very important, you can say, and also reducing the size of page.
Okay. So one of the things, accurate. So one of the things that CDN does is that if you have a server and let's say 10,000 people are accessing your server. So first of all, they would be making API calls to your server, and then if your page has a lot of images, then it will also be downloading images for them. So the server load is very important, and you have to maximize the usage. Let's say if this becomes 10,000 to let's say 100,000, then it will start hurting your server. So what happens is that you can use a CDN server for hosting different static assets such as images, articles to a different server, and then you can load it from there. So this is also one consideration that you can think of for optimizing your application, because that will put lesser load to your server, and in return what will happen is that more people will fetch data faster from your server because the server load is low. So you can also consider CDN server for your applications. You also have to consider if you want to use internationalization or not, like different languages in your Angular app based on the client's requirement, but this is also something which comes very often in different applications. And the environments that you can configure. For instance, if your team has a culture of having 3 different servers, like many teams have, for instance, you have a dev server where active development is being done, then there's a QA server which is supposed to have the stable code, and then there's the staging server or the final server which is shown to the client for demo purposes. So you can configure different environments as such in your application based on what you have. So there are some organizational challenges that you will face when working in a company, and we'll talk about how you can tackle that as well. So the first thing that comes in mind is consistency. You have 10 developers working with your project, and let's say um, one person uses 4 spaces for indentation and you use 2 spaces for indentation, right? And this is something which is configured in the editor. So what will happen? If any of you have automated packages, let's say Prettier, which automatically indents everything and removes white spaces and stuff like that, then what will happen is that if I have 2 spaces, I pushed a code and you are working on it. As soon as you hit your save button, the Prettier will configure the overall file according to your settings. And then what will happen? You'll get a commit with a file with a lot of changes. I don't know what you worked on because the whole file is changed. The 4 spaces are now converted into 2, so it's green all over the page. So the consistency is important in terms of code quality, code indentation and code features. It's also important to understand how you are working, how you are naming your variables, how you are naming your classes, how you are naming your functions, where do you put comments, even if you put comments or not. So consistency throughout the organization is very important, and if there is no consistency at the place where you are working right now, try introducing it. Try to talk about this to a senior and come up with a document, and this will obviously polish your skills as well as it will show yourself in a company as a better person. The other thing is code reusability. Sometimes, most of the times when developers are working on one thing and we have to ship things, we just copy it, paste it, and then later on, like 3 months later, when you have to change on a page, you go on the page and it's fixed, but then the issue is reopened because that's not fixed on the other page where you copied it. So you have to kind of be in sync with these things. So code reusability is very important. If there is a thing, there's a thing that my senior used to say, that if there's a code which is supposed to work on more than one places, you can refactor it, even if it's 2 places. So if you have a function, let's say if you have a statement which is being used 2 places in a code, you can refactor it. This is very extreme, by the way. You can skip it, but usually create functions whenever you see there are more than one places. If there is a HTML template that is being copied over and over, try creating a component for it and then reuse it everywhere. Maintainability is very important. So same thing, if you are copy pasting your code everywhere, then maintaining it becomes very hard. If you have inconsistent code here and there, then maintaining it becomes very hard. If you have different naming conventions, maintaining it becomes very hard, because you will open the code of some other guy and you'll not understand what's happening because of the conventions used. So there should be a style guide being followed throughout the organization. If not, try to introduce it. For Angular, the pro tip is use the Angular guide. How many of you have seen Angular guide? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many of you have used the Angular guide? Because many people see it. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So Angular guide is the best resource out there. You go there, you read it. It may seem like it's boring, but it's actually not. You'll learn a lot from this, and because it's the way it is laid out is very important. It will tell you how your components should be constructed, what you should put in your component, what you should not put in your component. If you have something which manipulates DOM, where do you put it? Anyone? If you are, let's say, adding a class to some component, or maybe you are scrolling down or kind of removing an element from the view, directives. It should not be in your component. If you have heavy processing in your application, like you get this data from the server and then you manipulate it heavily, like create different objects and calculate different things, where do you do it? In the component? Services, exactly. So all of these things that we know from maybe different people, from our seniors, from videos, all of that is mentioned here in the Angular style guide. So you can go through this and learn a lot about Angular architecture yourselves. Going forward, so Angular style guide will help you understand how you can organize your modules, what are the Angular lifecycle hooks. This is very important when you are creating complex applications. You can use on init, on destroy, on changes, stuff like that. So you will know what lifecycle hooks are important. For instance, there is a use case where you are using a nested content child, let's say, and then you are using ng on init to assign it something, and when you do it, it says it's null. So you have to understand when that child comes into the view, or when that child is compiled as an Angular component, so you can access it. So there are different lifecycle hooks which actually mean what happens with a component at what stage of the Angular compilation, right? So you can read about that in the Angular style guide as well. You can follow consistent naming conventions, like how you should name your files, how you should name your variables, etc. So you can see all of that in the Angular style guides. How you can create and use services, that is also very important. We do have a use case where, so consider a use case, and this is for people who have worked a bit on Angular, like more than 6 months or something. So I have a problem where I'm updating a variable in a service, right? Let's say it's a token. There are two modules, different modules, okay, two different pages. Let's say a profile page and an account page. So I'm updating the token variable in the service, and then I'm accessing it in the other page, and it says it's null. So I have already put the string token in the service. I know that it should be there, but it's not. What may be the reason? Anyone can answer. New or not? So let me explain. Services are supposed to be, usually services are supposed to be provided once in the application. So consider it like an object which is here in the air, and there are a lot of components here and there. Every component or module is trying to access the same service. When you provide a service once in the app, it creates one instance of the application, so every component is accessing the same thing. If you provide a service into two different modules, it creates two instances of the service. So if you update something in module A, the service instance is different there, and you will not be accessing the same thing in the second module. So this is a question which even comes in the interviews, Angular interviews. So if you provide a service more than once in the overall application, it will create multiple instances, and thus you will not be able to access the values in sync. So Angular style guide will tell you how you can create and use services. From Angular 7, I believe there is something in the decorator called provided in. So whenever you create a service, it says provided in root, which means that it is automatically providing the service to the root, which is only assigned once, only one instance per app. And Angular style guide will also tell you how you can follow a scalable project structure, and we'll talk about something like that in the later state also throughout this talk. So let the fun begin. You can clone this repository. It's github.com/ahsan/marvel-heroes. So clone it right now. Check out the step 1 branch and then do npm install. These are the steps that you have to do right now, and then you can serve the application. So I'm gonna give you 2 minutes to do that, considering we have a good internet connection. सही है. तो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल यस, कोई क्वेश्चन है? ठीक है. अच्छा, तो आई विल बी ओपनिंग द प्रोजेक्ट नाउ एट द स्टेप 1 ब्रांच. सो व्हाट यू हैड टू डू इज़, आपको क्लोन करना था प्रोजेक्ट. उसके लिए आपके पास गिट इंस्टॉल्ड होना चाहिए, Node.js इंस्टॉल्ड होना चाहिए. एंगुलर पाकिस्तान का ये जो इवेंट हो रहा है, इसका जो फेसबुक पेज था, फेसबुक इवेंट था, उस पर आई पोस्टेड के क्या क्या रिक्वायरमेंट्स हैं, Node.js, गिट और एडिटर, ये सारी चीज़ें वहाँ पे मेंशन थी. डू फॉलो द पेज इंस्ट्रक्शन सो वी कैन हैव फास्टर वर्कशॉप. तो अब हमारे पास क्या सिचुएशन है कि ये प्रोजेक्ट स्ट्रक्चर है हमारा. जिन्होंने कभी एंगुलर का प्रोजेक्ट नहीं देखा वो देख सकते हैं. उनको मैं क्विकली बता देता हूँ क्या ओवरऑल सिचुएशन है यहाँ पे. Like every other application, the entry point of the web app is index.html. Okay, so if you look at index.html, everyone can see this and this. Clear? Okay, so in the body, the main thing here is this component, which is called mhroot or the root component. Okay, let's have a look at what was the command that I used to create this project. So the command used was ng new. Once you have Angular CLI installed, you can do ng new marvel-heroes. This is the name of the project that we are using. Then I'm using -- routing, which means that I'm adding the support of different routing for pages within the app while creating the application. Otherwise, you will have to create the files yourself. Okay, so I'm adding routing here. I'm selecting the styles files to be SCSS files. By default, they are CSS files. So you can enforce that you want SCSS. And then I'm appending the prefix here to mh. What does it do? Exactly. Every component that I will create will have the name mh prefixed before it. So for instance, you are creating a component named button in your app, right? So if you just name it button and then in future you are, let's say you are importing a library, let's say Bootstrap, it also has a button. Now Angular will be confused which button it should render. So every module or every component library has a prefix before it just to avoid conflicts. So for every component created in this application, I'm using mh, which means Marvel Heroes. So whenever you create a project, you can also put different prefixes to make sure that your components are unique. So that's why this root component is basically called mh-root. Otherwise, it would have been just root. Okay. All of the settings regarding this prefix or any configuration related to Angular is inside Angular JSON. This is the project Marvel Heroes. The prefix is defined here. So if you want to change the prefix, once you have made a mistake, let's say, you can come here and change this. There's also one more place where this has to be changed, but I'm not going to go there. So everything related to the project settings is inside angular.json. Now, the entry point of the project, as I said, is index.html. The first thing that is inside the body is the root component. Okay. Apart from this, the main root component, which is this one, resides in the app folder. So we have the source folder, the app folder, and then this app component. This is the main component of your file. Consider it as the outermost box of your view. Okay, so If you open this, you will see a bunch of code here. But if you go to the component TS file, which is the definition of the component, you can see that the selector is mh root. This is where it is coming from. Okay, so you mention the selector here, and whenever you have to use a component in the HTML, you can use it like this selector. Anyways, so we have the app component here, which is the main component. Apart from that, we have the routing set up here, which has no routes right now because the routes folder is empty. So this is currently running on the default route. And we have some code inside the app HTML. So what I have here is I have already included Angular material in the project, which is library. So I have used some components from Angular material to kind of create a view which looks like this for now. So we have a header at the very top, and then we also have a side menu, which has a couple of lists here. Okay, so once you are experienced, this is not gonna take more than half an hour integrating and kind of reaching this potential. Okay, so what I've done here in terms of project structure is that I have this app HTML, which is understood. I have this side nav component here, which is on the left, which is here. This is the left one, and then the content is what is behind here. This white space is the content. Okay, so this is what we have so far. Any questions in this one? So this is the basic project structure. Every component that you create has a HTML file, SCSS file, or CSS file, and has the test file, which is the unit test file, and then the component's definition, which comes along with it. So let's move forward. Right. So question, what is a core module? Because here you can see a folder named core. Anyone answer? Can anyone answer this one? What is a core module? Have you used a core module in your project? Yes, what does it do? Okay, anyone else? No. So there are three kind of modules that you can use. Modules for pages, that's one. Modules, a core module and a shared module, and we will talk about these later as well. Right now we have this core module. So if I open the core folder, you can see there's a core module inside. Okay, inside that we have some components declared. So every module contains a set of components, directives, pipes, services. Okay, so this header component is basically here, which is here. So the way to structure your project, and this is kind of the architecture thing, that you can put a components folder if you have reusable components within a module. Okay, so this components folder will contain any components which is specific to the core. The core module is supposed to contain components which are only going to be used once within the app. Okay, this core module is there because you don't want to have every component declared in the app component. So app component becomes clear. Okay, so we create another module, provide all of our components there, provide all of our services there, declare directives, pipes, and then we import the core module into the app module. So the app module is clear, it doesn't have any definitions, but the core module has everything that the application needs. Make sense? You have to provide all your services in the core module. That's one thing that you can do. But now with the provided in thing that I mentioned for Angular 7, it doesn't matter where you declare your service because it is already provided to the root by default. But usually it is a good practice that when you have an application, let's say you have an application like Facebook, so it has events, organizations, stuff like that. So you can have all your services inside the core folder, create a services folder here, and then provide all the services in your core module. The benefit of core module is that you will always know that this is provided only once in the app module and never ever in any other module. That makes sense to everyone? Any questions? Good question. So ये core module जो है हमारे पास, this is imported in the app module. So if I go into the app module and go into the imports, you can see that I'm importing it here. And this is the only place where you would want your core module to be imported. So we created a core module, imported into the app module, and thus we are able to use the header component because the header component is part of core. It's not part of app component, and we are using the header inside app HTML here. So app module does not know about it. If I remove this app module's core module import, then Angular will start giving me errors because it would not understand what happened with the header component. Okay, it's compiling right now. Any questions regarding this? Clear? Good. Okay. So I'll just let this compile. So now once this refreshes, you'll see that there's nothing on the view, and that's because we removed the core module, so it is not getting what mh header is. Make sense? So I'm gonna save this again so it works. Okay, let's move forward. I'm gonna close this one. So the core module can contain global services only provided once in the project. That makes sense. Can contain core layout components for the app like the header, the footer. They are only supposed to be provided once, and then the rest of the content is in the middle, which you can use with router outlet for switching. Anything that has to be shared between different modules should not be in the core module. Okay. It can also contain interceptors, guards for the application. How many of you have worked with interceptors? 1, 2, 3. Okay. So whenever you have auth tokens or something like that, and you have to push that with every HTTP call, you can use interceptors for that. Just simple information. Okay, going forward. So one more pro tip regarding consistency to the point where we are right now. Use editor config throughout your team. And one more thing which is important is that Angular by default comes with editor config already. Where is it? If I go to the project and see this file, this is the editor config file, which already contains things like what is the indent size for this editor. For instance, this is 2. So whenever I'm formatting within this VS Code editor, it will format with 2 spaces for indentation. Okay. But out of the box, if you have just installed VS Code, this will not work because you have the file, but you don't have the extension to integrate it. So you can go to the extensions and then you can just search editor config and it will bring the extension which you should install. So this is the extension that you should install. If you don't have VS Code and there's some other person working with, let's say, what's the other one? JetBrains, Sublime. There are also extensions for those editors as well. But make sure that editor config is being used so you have consistency throughout your indentations and spaces and stuff like that. Okay. Okay, let's move forward. So let's have another look at the code. Now we'll talk about boosting the app's performance. Okay. So you have to check out the second branch. So just do git checkout step 2. I'm going to do the same. Those who cannot do it, just watch the screen. So I'll do git checkout step -2, and this will do some magic. I'll go back to the application. This is recompiling. I'll let it compile and then we'll see what happens. So right now there are a few changes which will happen with the app. Just a second. So we still have the Marvel heroes here. There are some CSS changes that I did previously. This was not doing anything on hover. Now it turns gray like magic. So I open this and now the items have been changed to heroes grid page. Okay. So if I click on this, you can see that it says heroes grid words. This is the first thing when you create a component and see it. Okay. So when talking about performance, there is one issue with the current approach, and I'm going to show this as what will you do when we are talking about performance. So if I go to the network tab and see what are the files being downloaded when I hit the root page, which is the landing page of your application. So there are many files: runtime, polyfills, style.js, vendor.js, and main.js. Usually main.js is the file for your application's code. So if I open this, and this is the root component, and if I go to app component, I can see there is a function named close side nav. So I'm going to try to find this in the compiled JS. So if I try to find this, here it is, app component.prototype.close side nav. Obviously TypeScript is compiled to JavaScript, so this is the JavaScript code. Okay, so I can find this, which is very good. I have not been to the heroes grid page yet, but if I search heroes grid component, I can still see the code of that whole component here. This is the heroes grid component, but I have not been to that page yet, which means if you have 10 components and you land on the landing page, that means all of the code for your 10 components will be here, and the user is not even navigating to any of the pages. And you can see how much time it took, what was the size of the file. So it's kind of 25.9 MB, 26 KB. This is the amount of time it took to load, 87 milliseconds, right? So it's kind of okay because our application is nothing, it's very small. Okay, but we can improve this. We can lazy load the heroes grid component in the routing. So how do we do that? I'm going to quickly do that by just I can make the changes, but since we are out of time, I think we have to take a break. So I'm going to do this quickly. I'm going to go to git checkout step to final. Okay, so what I've done here is, and I should have showed you what was happening before. Let me go back to step 2. So here what we have right now, the routing works like this. So we have the app routing module, and in that we have pasted grid. So whenever we go to /grid, this heroes grid component is loaded. Okay, any questions so far? This is how routing works in general. Okay, so we specify the path, which is the grid. So if I go to -grid, that means that the grid component will be loaded. Simple as that. Okay, and heroes grid component, if I open this in the heroes grid component, it says here heroes grid works. This is what's being shown on the view. So this is how it works right now. But there's just one problem which is causing everything to be compiled on main.js file, is that in order to use heroes grid component into the app component, or here the app module itself, I have to import the heroes grid module into the app module, because it's a different component. It's inside heroes grid module. So heroes grid component is defined in heroes grid module. This is the heroes grid module, and it is declared here. So I cannot use this component outside of it unless I import this module into the app module, and that's what's happening. If I go to app module, you can see the heroes grid module is here. This is causing everything to be compiled into one file. Okay, so if I go to git checkout step to final, I have changed something. First of all, I have removed the import from here, so this is now not being included in the app module. That's the first thing. The second thing is, in the app-routing module, I am now lazy loading the whole module like this. You can specify load children. There is a syntax which just is that it specifies the file name. It is giving the relative path, heroes grid module, which is here, and then the module's name. So when you do this, what this will do is that it will lazy load the module when this grid happens. But there comes a question that now we are not specifying which component will be rendered. Previously we had component here, which will tell hero grid works, but now there's nothing here. So what happens is that you will have to create a new routing module inside the heroes grid module, and that specifies empty. From the app, it's coming /grid. This empty string means just that. Grid, empty, nothing, then we are rendering heroes grid component. Make sense? Now if I go back to the pages, and if I go back to the root page, we have the main.js there. It was loaded in 24 milliseconds, and the size is reduced to 21.3 kilobytes. Okay, if I open this and if I try to search heroes grid component, doesn't find it. Okay, make sense? Any questions? Now if I clear the network log and I move to the heroes grid page, here you can see another JS loaded, 6.5 KB, and then it contains the heroes grid component definition. Make sense? So right now we have just 6 KB file, but if you have a big module, it could be lots of KBs, and you are saving the network of the user. Let's suppose you have 10 pages and the user only went for 5 pages, then you are saving the user's data. okay, user's data package, and you are also providing things faster to the user by reducing the amount of data loaded in the first paint. That makes sense? Any questions? We are taking a break here. If you have any questions regarding this or anything else, please go ahead. Okay, so let's continue. So we were talking about the lazy loading stuff, and we are good with that, right? Any questions? Perfect. The next thing is using the components smartly. So whenever you are doing the architecture of the application, you have to analyze which of your components can be smart and which can be dumb. So let's discuss about what those are. So there are two kinds of components usually in the Angular app: smart components, and the smart components contain the business logic. Okay, and then they also can have the data manipulation to some extent. The dumb components do not have any kind of business logic. They are supposed to be presentational. So they are also called presentational components. So they should only get input, show that on the view, and then they can provide outputs. That's it, nothing else. That makes sense? We'll also see an example of smart and dumb components soon. Okay? So using the components smartly is one of the good choices when we are talking about architecture. For instance, if I go to just a second, git checkout step 3. So in step 3, if I open the components hero detail, then you will see that this component is basically just using an input. Sorry, not this one, the grid item. The grid item component, there are two things which I'll show you right now. So if everything works fine, what we see right now is that we have the grid component working, which basically loads different heroes from the Marvel API. Okay, so these components in which these images are being shown, this is a separate component. This is the grid item component. So there are two components right now what we are talking about. The grid component, which is this whole page. It contains the heroes grid title and stuff like that. This is this one, hero grid component.html. It contains the heroes grid. It also contains the form. It also contains different things, including the hero grid item. We are looping through the heroes on this hero grid item. Okay, this heroes grid component is basically the smart component, which is doing all of the things, including getting the data from the server. So when this component is initiated, ng on init, it loads the heroes. Okay, so this component is responsible for getting the data from the server, but the grid item component does not do anything like that. It is not responsible for any kind of business logic. It just accepts the input, which is a single hero item, and then in the view, it just shows the image of the hero. That makes sense? So there are two kind of components, smart and dumb, and we have to analyze when to use which one. Usually your container components or your page component are the smart components, and anything that you are using within is most likely to be a dumb component. Okay? Moving forward, we should be using the OnPush strategy. Can you tell me what that is? Anyone? Yes.
ऑनगोइंग स्ट्रेटेजी में होता है कि जब एंगुलर उस वक्त चेंज डिटेक्शन चलाता है जब इनपुट चेंज होता है।
Okay.
डिफॉल्ट एंगुलर की जो चेंज डिटेक्शन है वो मल्टीपल टाइम्स चलती है।
Yes.
तो वो आपके जो है वो परफॉर्मेंस पे जो है वो इम्पैक्ट करती है।
ठीक है।
ऑनपुश में सिर्फ उस वक्त चेंज डिटेक्शन चलेगी जब आपके इनपुट चेंज हो।
वेरी गुड, बिल्कुल एक्यूरेटली यही है। एंगुलर की जो चेंज डिटेक्शन है, एंगुलर चेंज डिटेक्शन रन्स फ्रॉम टॉप टू बॉटम, from the root component to the very nested component. So it goes from up to down. Okay, and it detects changes on every action, mostly the browser actions, and apart from that also on set timeout, set interval. So there are some things like on even the XHR calls as well. Okay, So consider that you have a page and you have 20 components on it. Okay, Angular will run the change detection on each of those every time something happens. If you click anywhere on the page, a change detection cycle will run. Okay, if you type something, change detection will run. But for instance, if this we talk about just this hero grid component, I know that this image is not going to change throughout my page experience. Is there any point in running change detection in that case? On the hero grid component, the grid item component? No. I'm talking about this hero grid item component which just shows the image. So I know that when the heroes are fetched from the server, let's say there were 10 heroes, and now I have 10 hero grid item component on the view. So I've got the heroes, I've got the view. I know that these 10 items will not change now because I've got the heroes and I've rendered them. I will not be changing the image source URL or the hero's name. I know that. So there is no point in change detecting this in this hero grid component, right? So I can tell Angular to not run any change detection on this until this input value is changed. This input value. So what will happen is that until the whole input is changed, Angular will not run the change detection on this. So we are actually saving performance. Okay. Any presentational components that we make when we are talking about using the components smartly, this is what we are talking about. If we smartly configure our components to be presentational, then we can also use the change detection on push on most of our components, which will tell Angular not to run change detection until the whole input is changed, which is faster. That makes sense to everyone? And the way you tell Angular to use the change detection on push is by this. You add this line in the components decorator. You say change detection will be change detection strategy dot on push. Okay. Now if I change anything with this hero, nothing will happen until I change the whole hero object. So if I change that, then it will run the change detection. Okay. So this is very powerful thing. I have a whole talk on Angular change detection. I think it's on YouTube. So I will share the link on Angular Pakistan page. If you are interested, you can also watch that. Okay, so that's about the change detection on push stuff. Now we'll talk about something regarding app structure and organizing the modules themselves. So for that you have to use something called lift, L-I-F-T, and you can find the definition on the Angular IO style guide that I mentioned earlier. The point of lift is you have to structure your application, and keep this in mind, this is very important. Structure your application such that you can locate the code intuitively and fast. If you have a directive, name it my directive.directive.ts. Let's suppose if I have hero, I may have hero component, I may have hero directive, I may have hero pipe. So if I have to locate the component easily, I should just type the name. Let's say I could say hero detail component. So I can see what is the file name and what it contains. Okay. So identifying the component by name and quickly finding it is one of the things that you should consider when you are naming your components. Make sense? The next thing is identify by the name of the file what it contains and what it does. If I have a HTTP service, I will name it http.service.ts. Angular does that by default. But if I'm going to create HTTP interceptor, then I have to name it myself. And I'll name it http-interceptor or .interceptor, whatever you feel more comfortable with, .ts. So when I have to actually see the file, I see, okay, this is the interceptor, it contains the interceptor code. This is the service, it contains the service code. So name your file such that it contains exactly what it wants. Okay, maybe you are creating some interface, maybe you are creating some constant, maybe you are containing some mapping for something or a class. So you can name that. For instance, if I'm going to create a class for hero, I'll name it hero.class.ts. So I'll know that it is a class. So that's what the I stands for. Flatten the project structure as long as possible. Which means if you have a hierarchy of components, let's say if you have the page and inside that you have a component, inside that you have another component, if you are structuring that in the form of folders, like if you say heroes grid, then inside that there's a component, let's say hero detail, Inside that there may be other components. So you create another components folder inside and create other components, and it goes on and on and on. So what will happen is that the file paths will become too long, things will be hard to find, and if I just want to go through the folder structure, I will not be able to reach it quicker. So keep the structure as flat as long as you can. So usually the thing goes like, you create a module for the page like the heroes grid, then you create a components folder, and every component in this whole module will be inside this components folder. That's the usual thing, unless you are making something very complex. Okay, that makes sense. So you have to keep the structure as flat as possible and try to be dry. What does dry stand for? Don't repeat yourself. So create the components such that they can be reusable. You don't have to copy paste, you don't have to repeat yourself. And while talking about the architecture, we'll also see what kind of components can be shared, what kind of components should be within this module. For instance, if I'm creating a hero detail component, I should be thinking if I'm going to use this here or if I'm going to use this elsewhere as well. So I'll move this around accordingly based on what this is supposed to do. Okay. So right now on step 3, if you clone it, you will see that this on click of it, it just shows the name of the hero component. I could have made this a bit better, but I had less time and an eye infection, so I did not. So this right now just shows the name. Okay. But you can show image, comics, whatever is coming from the server. So there's a lot of detail. So speaking of that, now we have understood what we are talking about. One more thing that I added to the heroes grid is the hero detail component. It's a simple component. It contains the HTML with just the hero name and the button that says OK. You click on it and the modal that is being shown is dismissed. So it's very simple. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Going forward. Now we are talking about organizing features. How can you organize different features within a module? So first of all, think about self-contained features. This is a term that is used in the Angular world quite often, which means that if there is a team working on feature A and if there is a team working on feature B, it should be worked in a way that whatever team A pushes to the gate, it does not break anything on B. So try to encapsulate it as a module or a feature which can be exported to other applications as well, as much as you can. If there is a certain dependency that has to be there, then it's an exception. But when you're creating modules, you should think, first of all, you should think well. That's the first step. Then you will start thinking, if I will use this in another module, then you will start thinking if I should use this in another app. So that's how you should start thinking about that. So multiple teams can be assigned to a feature or modules if the features are self-contained. For instance, if your application has a calendar page, then there could be a whole team working on the calendar module itself, and it doesn't have to do anything with the other people of the team. So structure your modules in such a way that the dependencies are as less as possible. Okay. Teams can work without pushing breaking changes. Obviously, if you are working on a certain feature, there's no problem in pushing your code because that will not break the other's code unless you intend to. Okay, the next thing is share if you care. This is one of the things that people ask questions about very often. We talked about core module, but we did not talk about reusing a component in different modules, which is usually gone in the shared module. Okay. So you can check out the step 4 branch and we'll talk about what we are doing there. So I'm going to do git checkout step 4. When this is done, we will see slight changes that we have done to the project. Previously, we just had this heroes grid component, but now we also have something called heroes list. If I go to the routing module, you will see that we have the grid page, the list page. Both of them are being lazily loaded as we discussed before. Same procedure, nothing fancy. On default, whenever we are jumping to the root page, since it doesn't have anything to show, we are redirecting to the grid page. So on landing, the user will automatically go to the grid page, as simple as that. And we also had to go to app component and add this heroes list item. So we can now navigate from grid page to list page, and so forth. Make sense to everyone? Now the list page is similar to the grid page. And what I want you to do is, now I have just the list. I didn't have time to kind of make it beautiful. So if I click here, what happens is that everything breaks. Can anyone tell me what's happening? What I wanted was the same thing. If I go to the grid page, and now since everything is breaking, so if I go here and let's say fetch something from the server, then I should be able to click on the item, grid item, and see the details. This is the same thing that I wanted for my list page. I should be able to click it and see the name of the person or the character. But if I go to list page and try to do the same thing, the same functionality is there. If we go to the components, let's say the grid component, you will see that we have certain things here: load heroes, ng on init does this, search form gets a value subscribed and fetches the data from the server. Same stuff is here in the heroes list. If I go to heroes list component, there's the load heroes here which loads the heroes. Everything is same except the view that I have. I'm just using a list here, okay? And the only thing that is changed is, in fact, nothing is changed except this list. There's the same show details function, which basically does the same thing. If I go to the definition of show details, you will see that it opens the material dialog with the hero detail component. It's the same thing which happens on grid, but it's working there and not here. Can anyone guess why? Import नहीं किया क्या? Hero detail component को import करना है या hero? Should I import heroes grid module into heroes list? Will this solve it? Very good. इसमें hero detail का component नहीं है. Hero details का component है inside heroes grid module. So what can I do to make this work? Should I import heroes heroes grid module into heroes list? Yes. So I'm going to do that. Heroes grid module. So I'm going to import this right now. And I'm just doing this because we have plenty of time. So I've imported this. This is compiled successfully, and let's see what happens. So I'm on the list page. Let me get rid of this. The list is here. If I click on this, now it works. Pretty good, right? So if I create a new component into heroes list, and if I have to use that into the grid component, what should I do? Import the list module into the grid module? Same as this? Will that work? Why? Circular dependency error. If I'm importing module A into B and I'm importing module B into A, that's a circular dependency, because when compiling A module, Angular watches what are its dependencies, so it fetches B, but B requires A, so nothing is compiled. That is the problem. So we cannot have situations like creating a component in a module which has to be shared and import the whole module into the other module. So the solution to this is moving this into a shared module. Okay, so first of all, instead of doing this here, since I have time, I'm just gonna do this quickly. We'll create a module. Everyone can see what's on the right. Okay, ng g module, we'll say shared, so this will create a shared module. Okay, and what we'll do is that we'll take out the hero detail component from heroes grid and take it to the shared module. So I'm going to create a components folder here, and I'm going to move this hero detail from here to the shared components. What's the next step? Moving the declaration. So moving the declaration is the next step. Right now this hero detail is declared in the heroes grid module here. Declarations here. So I have to remove this because the hero detail is out of the heroes grid module now. So I'm going to remove this. I'm going to remove this entry components as well. and that's pretty much about it. Now I'm gonna go to shared components, shared module, where I have moved the hero detail, and I'm gonna declare it here, hero detail component. Am I going too fast? No? Very good. Then I have to, um, so if I just do that, will this work? No. Can anyone tell me what are entry components? By the way, I was willing to bring some Angular stickers today. I was in a hurry, so I forgot about that. So anyone who answers right will still get those, but not today. So who can tell me about entry components? An Angular sticker looks like something this, which is on my Mac. So it looks good. So what are entry components? Okay, entry components are basically used to tell Angular that this component is not on the view right now and will come dynamically. Okay, the pages. So whenever I have to use a component, what do I do? For instance, if I'm talking about heroes grid component, this one. In this page, if I have to use this component, I just put it in the HTML, right? But are we putting the detail component anywhere on the view? No, we are not, because in the grid component, we mentioned the component here, hero detail component. It's on the TS file, it's not on the view. So while compilation, Angular does not know where it should be fetched from or if it should be shown. Same goes with the pages. Every page that we have, heroes grid page, heroes list page, they are not on the view, they are not on the app HTML, app component HTML, they are not on the index HTML. But Angular's router module defines every page as an entry component itself. So we don't have to do that. But if we have to dynamically create a component on the view anytime, we have to specify that as an entry component. So I'll put one more sticker on my laptop because no one answered. So, so yeah, in the shared module, I have entry components defined. Is this enough? Should I go ahead? I have to export. Yes, very good. So in the shared module, if I don't export this module, this component out, I'm only allowed to use the hero detail component within the shared module. But if I have to use this outside of the shared module, I have to also export this component. So I'm gonna export this using the exports array, and I'm gonna say hero detail component. Okay, this is very important. The declaration is to tell Angular that this component is declared within the shared module. The entry component is because we want to let Angular know that this will be created dynamically. The export is for any component which will import the shared module for that component to use the hero detail component. Now we have done everything apart from this. I'm going to see what I have not saved yet. So what I have to do now is I have to basically import this hero detail component from the new path. So it's now importing it from the shared components, which is perfectly fine. So I'm going to save this. In the list component, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to remove this one. And by the way, you can see that VS Code already tells you where to import things from. So you can just click on this bulb and import things dynamically. So now I have updated the references and also I have moved things to the shared module. Is this enough? Everything works good now or not? Are we forgetting about anything? Yes. Right now, if I do this, nothing will work because Angular does not know about this component, or the module does not know about this component. So when it says no component factory found for this component, it means that the page in which you are using this component, the module of that page does not recognize this particular component. And that's because we have to import the shared module into both pages. The shared module is supposed to contain the reusable components, and you have to import the share module into any page, every page that you want to use the components in. If there are 10 components, you want to use one component into a particular page, you will import the shared module there. If there's another component page B requires, you will import shared module in the page B module. So I'm gonna go to the modules and I'm gonna do shared module which I've imported here. So now, sorry, I've imported it in the list module, and I'm gonna import this also into the grid module. So now I have imported the shared module into both the pages. This should expectedly work now. Okay. So let me quickly try this out. So on the heroes list page, if I click on blob, this doesn't work because demos. Now it says no component factory found for hero detail component. Did you add it to entry components? If I go to shared module, see it has been defined into the entry components. Sometimes this happens, right? Some files are not rendered right now. So I'm gonna double check this, and then probably I'm gonna try again. So if I click here, now it works fine. Make sense? Okay. So now it works in the list view, as well as if I go into the heroes grid page, it will also work there as well. So we have created a component which is used into the whole application. If you are working with different clients who have their own design systems, their own component libraries, this is how you would do that. You may not name it shared module, but you can call it anything, let's say X design system module, and then you will import that module into every page that you want. Let's say that library or module that you're creating contains buttons, inputs, whatnot modules, let's say headers, menus, and you can import that module into every of your pages and then utilize that on every page easily. Okay, that makes sense. So this is how you create different this is basically the beginning of creating component library. This is also a way of doing that. Okay, so if I check out step 4 final, that's going to be the same thing. So I'm going to just revert my changes, do git checkout step 4, which will basically be the same thing, and we'll go forward. Now I have a challenge for you guys, those who have the app working on their um, on their machines.